And you're trying to give the young people something that will help them. Yet you don't know exactly what it ought to be.
Thanks again for tuning into the TeachThought podcast. We appreciate your listenership, and we also, of course, appreciate any times you might share with your network and share with folks who might be interested in hearing these conversations that are meant to help you as an educator better prepare students for the modern world. We're very excited to see the onset of spring, warmer weather in most places, especially here in the Northern Hemisphere. And as vaccines are rolling out, we're starting to see an uptick in schools, thankfully, who are looking to get back to doing in-person and on-site workshops and professional development. With that in mind, we do still offer online options for all of our workshops. So if you're looking for professional development, whether it be on-site or online, please navigate on over to wegrowteachers.com, and there you'll see in our menu all the options that we have for ways in which we can help you better prepare students for the modern world. Project-based learning, differentiated instruction, assessment, literacy, growth mindset, and more. So again, if you are interested and looking to help grow your school to better prepare students for the modern world, wegrowteachers.com. In this episode, I spoke with Clement Townsend, who is a former broadcaster, and he has a program that helps educators improve student skills by integrating media through the video journalism process called Video Journalism Pro Online. And we talked about the ways in which he works and the importance of his work in the context of critical thinking and creativity. Started off by sort of touching on the ways in which maybe young people especially have sort of an attraction to celebrity in the ways in which media and media production might tap into that in an engagement kind of way. Again, talked a lot about critical thinking and authenticity and audience of any video and media that one might create, some of the needs for video production, and then ended by kind of talking about some of the ways in which the work looks in schools and how he works with schools and teachers around the country. So as you might think about teaching and learning, especially in the context of project-based learning, in which we do lots of work, and we touched on that here, one of the things that we ask students to do is to create things and move from consumers to creators and even sometimes to contributors. I think video and creation of media is absolutely a really great way to show and demonstrate learning, and I hope this podcast might be helpful in thinking about the ways in which you might do something like that. All right, well, welcome to the podcast. I have with me Clement Townsend, and we are going to talk about his story and his work, which is around video content and working with students and teachers. But before we do, as I usually like to do, give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. You have a bit of a backstory in how you got to this current position in life, and I guess let us know what that is so we know who and kind of some of the backstory and context of who we're talking to.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Drew. It's a pleasure. Certainly, I took an unusual path, I would say, into education. My parents were both educators. I think, we share that similarity. I believe I've heard you say your mom was an educator.
And my grandmother.
Your grandmother as well. So my mom was a teacher and my dad was an administrator. But I never really wanted to do that. That was kind of the furthest thing from my mind. I wanted to be an athlete, but I wasn't tall enough to play professional sports. So with my parents being educators, they said, you have to have a plan, son. What do you want to do? And, in my day, when your parents are educators, the thing you do is you go to college. So, I tried to figure out, well, how can I still be around sports and still have a career? So I figured I could be on television and discuss sports. So I decided to major in communications. That was the next step that I knew. So that took me from Chicago, which is where I'm from, to Philadelphia, Temple University. They prepared me well. I was on television in San Angelo, Texas, Mobile, Alabama, did some real cool things there. Went to the NBA All-Star game, college football, national championship, Super Bowl, went on to Lynchburg, went on to Chicago. Throughout that time, Drew, I met a lot of youth that wanted to know what I did and how I did it. How could they be on television? They were interested in media, and that always stuck with me. So after I got to Chicago, I was there for 3 years, and then I got laid off. So I had been in television for 17 years, continuous employment, and then I faced what some people might call a defining moment. What do I do now? And I knew media. I was a media expert. I was passionate about youth. And I guess what was always in me in terms of my parents being educators, I guess that came to the forefront because I noticed there was a gap in education in terms of students learning media, in terms of students creating videos and understanding the power of media. You and I talked just briefly about narratives and things of that nature and how narratives can be controlled through media. So I decided to help teachers because a lot of teachers, aren't necessarily trying to take a risk. They probably have a degree in education. That's what a lot of teachers do. But I was a media expert. So I decided I wanted to go into the classroom and assist teachers to help them teach their students videos to really bridge the gap and help students get those 21st century skills that they need.
Yeah. So I'm curious, as you think about your sort of desire or draw to media and maybe to being on TV, it strikes me one of the things that I think is an interesting dynamic that has surfaced more so over the past, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, I don't know, with the sort of the advent of the internet and media being social media and videos and TikTok and all those things. There is, and again, we talked a little bit before we went live here about our shared fatherhood of kids, and you have one that's 9, right? And the other
Absolutely.
one's 1, you said?
That's correct.
Yeah, so the 1-year-old probably isn't quite into TikTok yet, but I'm imagining the 9-year-old is at least aware of it. But like my daughters, 12 and 14 now, have some sense of like, I want to be famous, like that, or that there's a real value to that celebrity and being drawn to celebrity. And I find that to be kind of weird as I have matured. I certainly I recognize my attraction to it when I was younger, and like being around famous people is sort of like, wow, that wow factor, right? Like, how would you describe your sort of attraction to media, and is it any different than the ways you see it with young people today?
So I think there is a difference. So first, let me address where I believe a lot of youth are, where I believe your daughters may be, and where my daughter is. They look at TikTok and specifically YouTube, and it could be Instagram as well, but YouTube is so big and TikTok is big too. And they see these influencers, and certainly these influencers seem to have, quote unquote, certainly we're doing a podcast audio, but a great life.
Right.
So they're drawn to what looks to be such a great life. They're influencers, they seem like they're doing cool things. You hear about the followers they have or how many views their video gets. And some of them actually are making money. I truly believe there are a lot of people on the internet who are getting views, who are not monetizing. There are some, but there is this perception out there that everybody is getting all these views, is monetizing and making the big bucks. And that is simply not true. But that's a whole nother topic in and of itself. For me, so when I graduated from high school in 1997, I'll date myself, there was no TikTok, there was no YouTube, there was no Instagram. So the draw for me was not being an influencer. The draw for me simply was, I like sports. I watch sports all the time. I'm not going to be an athlete. I see people who are interviewing athletes. I see people who go to the games and they're in the locker room, and I made the connection in my head, like, that's a job. They get paid to do that. So if I can't play sports, for me, the next best thing is to go to the games, talk to the athletes, watch the games, be in the locker room, and get paid. And I want to try to have a job that doesn't necessarily feel like work. So was celebrity in it? Once I got into it, that played a role, but that was not the initial draw. The initial draw was, I like sports. I want to talk about sports. I want to be around the game. And I know they pay people to do that. And I know some of these people get paid well. I want to go in that direction.
So you've dated yourself and said you graduated in 97. I graduated in 87 from high school. And I'm curious, because you are so associated with Chicago and sports then, and then we'll get to the actual content of the talk. Who's the GOAT? Is it LeBron or Michael Jordan?
That's not a question.
Because you're bridging that gap. You're right. Like I imagine you saw some of Jordan, right? But
all of Jordan.
Okay.
I was in Chicago when he won all 6 championships.
Okay.
91 through 97. Those were like, my 10-year-old, 13-year-old, 50. Like those are vivid memories.
Okay.
6 for 6. People say, well, it can't just be about championships. It can just be about championships. Anytime a guy goes to the finals and wins 6 titles and is undefeated 6-0 in the finals and never goes to a game 7, there is no question.
All right. Well, I'm with you on that one. But anyways, let's move to the actual teaching and learning content. So one of the things, and so the website is videojournalismpro.com, and we'll put in the show notes and links and that kind of thing. But one of the things that you touch on is increasing student engagement, which I think is a good bridge from where we just talked about sort of the attraction to celebrity and media. But how do you think about engagement and student engagement, and why media in particular does that, or how?
So I come from the perspective of meeting students where they are. We're trying to get them to learn. And I always try to put forth the idea that media is not just entertainment, media is also educational. So really trying to get administrators and teachers to understand, if you meet students where they are, you can take something that they're already doing, watching videos, and now use that to be educational. Again, you mentioned maybe TikTok with your daughters. I'm sure your daughters are on YouTube. I would imagine you watch a few YouTube videos from time to time. I watch YouTube videos. So whatever it might be, whether it's actually TV or Facebook Live or Instagram, we all watch video all the time. Like, we live in a society where now video is huge and really is an integral part of our day-to-day life. I always say, certainly they have the Apple Watch, and the watch can do so much. There will come a time, I'm not Nostradamus, I don't have a crystal ball, but I just see there will come a time when we watch video on our watches. So therefore, meeting students where they are, if they're watching videos, and video is such a huge part of our society and the society they grew up in and will continue to be in, well, it's only natural to merge education with this video content creation to deepen this learning experience and enhance the learning experience.
So I often talk about the difference between cognitive engagement and behavioral engagement, and both of them being pretty important. But the idea, one of the things that I think is a real question and a criticism to think about of teachers thinking about engagement is that sometimes, and I've mentioned this before in the podcast, thinking about inquiry-based learning or project-based learning, of which we do a lot, and your work, I think, fits really well in that genre of teaching and learning, but that there are sometimes teachers make a mistake or settle for just behavioral engagement, right? So we're trying to give them something that that they'll like, that they'll think is fun, that they'll think is engaging, and therein lies some of the classroom management kind of problems, because they're more committed to it because it's more interesting, and that now we're not fighting that compliance battle. All of that being very, very important, but then also taking that next step of the cognitive engagement and thinking about how we use something like this to get to the real cognitive engagement where they're really doing some deeper thinking and learning. So as your website kind of shows, it's like 21st century skills, creativity, critical thinking. So I'm curious how you think about those skills. Like how do you define critical thinking, and how do you see your work with teachers and students getting to that critical thinking?
So I approach everything from a journalism background, as I already explained. So it's not just making videos for video's sake. We've talked about YouTube and TikTok and things of that nature, but my aim is always for students to make videos that inform, that inspire, and videos that impact. So when I take somebody, I co-teach at times. I do after-school programs at times, and Video Journalism Pro is an online program for actual teachers. So it's actually taking students through actually the process that a journalist would take, which involves critical thinking. So if we're doing something on zoology or world hunger or whatever the topic is, I'm all about student choice. So, certainly you talk about maybe even, I guess, passion-based projects. What are some of the topics that are relevant to students? Now, how do we do the research and gather that information? So when we talk about critical thinking, that's the direction in which I take it. There is an abundance of information out there. How do you synthesize that information? How do you summarize that information? And now how do you present that information? How do you find out or take the information that's important, the information that's relevant, and how do you make it concise now where we could create a video, and then now where we can narrate that video and have a finished piece of content that shows mastery, that shows a demonstration of learning. That's what I think about when I think of critical thinking. And then along with that goes the creativity piece, which I believe you all believe in with the project-based learning. How do you put pictures with it? Or I would like to see students use their camera phone, 21st century skills, to actually film video. So now what you have narrated, how do your visuals match what you have said? How have you presented it in terms of your voice, in terms of your tone and your pacing and the word choice that you use? Like, you can tell a story, Drew, and I could tell a story about the same topic, whether it's about zoology, world hunger, whether it's about politics, but our creativity, we both would tell it differently. It could both be graded if that's what a teacher wanted to do, or it could both be, it doesn't have to be graded, that sort of thing. But the creativity piece, the direction in which you, I, or a student would take it, all depends on their creativity, and to really show them and teach them that they can create things. They can take an idea and see it through to the end and have a tangible product. That, to me, lends itself to what you said in terms of cognitive development and critical thinking and creativity.
So when you think about your journalism, I'm curious, some of the maybe Venn diagram kind of things, like, so the overlap, the similarities, and the differences in the way that you, I'm assuming, were trained in the sort of journalism mindset and the process, right? So probably in many ways similar, but quite different from that of a teacher. And I'm curious how you see that sort of overlap, those things that are similar and different. And as you think about video production in your training, what were some of the processes or pieces that you used or still use, perhaps, that say, oh, this is how we know the work is good? Like, this is the process, or this is the sort of tool that we use to know whether the work is good?
That's an interesting question in terms of whether the work is good, because, that all depends on who, I guess, is judging it, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I always think, or I always encourage students, whatever they create, I try to, what's the word I'm looking for? Just provide positive reinforcement, mm-hmm. because I want to foster creativity. I want to have it a space where you're not teaching students what to think, but teach them how to think. So whatever they create, I don't necessarily, to me, there is no judge of what's good, so to speak. If I put a story on television, the viewer might not like that story, but because they don't like the way I presented it, doesn't necessarily mean it's not good. It just didn't, it wasn't compelling to them. So that's a really difficult question to answer in terms of what is good. If we're taking it to an educational setting, I guess some of the things that you can look at that I discussed is, what was the research that went into it? How was the information presented in terms of how was this piece of content written? You can grade them on their voice and their speaking, because I believe public speaking skills are so good. And just also, just the final product in terms of what they displayed. If a 2-minute piece is assigned and a student only did 1 minute, well, they didn't fulfill requirements. If a 2-minute piece is assigned and a student did 3.5 minutes, well, they went above and beyond, that sort of thing. So there are some benchmarks. There are some things that you can use to, I guess, grade, and grade is not even really the word that I really like to use. But your question was determining what's good or bad. There are some guidelines that you can use in that regard.
All right. So one of the things that we really lean into is the authenticity piece and an authentic audience. And, in your work as a broadcaster, right, you had an audience that you were working for, whether they were live pieces or pre-produced pieces, right? And I would imagine in some ways there's a bit of a different sort of rubric or set of, like, this is the goal. Like, one of the things that we really want to get students to think about is, who is our audience? And especially for media, that is a really powerful lever. Who's our audience? Which then opens the door to how do we meet the needs of the audience, which is the rich inquiry piece that we talk about in project-based learning, that authenticity really does open that door for. And then that means you have to ask the questions of who that audience is and really try to figure that out. And then gives you a sense, at least a starting point, and opens the door to the assessment piece of how well have we met the needs of that audience. And some of that we want to think about in terms of the evidence, right? How do we know if it's met the needs of the audience? Well, if it was received, depending on the what they're creating and what the purpose of the media creation is, if it's meant to persuade or convince or to inform, that those pieces would help us to know whether that has achieved that goal. So in journalism and the way that you were trained in journalism, how much of that really, how much focus was there on the audience, and what did that look like if there was? I mean, I can imagine there has to have been, right?
Yeah, I would say there was. And I guess the word I was looking for was assess. When I was talking about, there are ways that you can grade it and things of that nature, yeah. You provided the word. There are ways to assess what the student has done. But in terms of the audience, certainly, I was in the sports setting, that sort of thing. So I was always trained to do pieces that appeal to people that wouldn't necessarily be sports fans, or they wouldn't necessarily be people that really like sports. So I always told stories that had a more common or more broad appeal. What is going on behind the scenes, what is going on off the field, that somebody who's just watching the news can get behind. So in a classroom setting, I'm always encouraging students, and I hope teachers, the audience for students would be their peers. They're creating pieces, they're creating content that appeals to or can be received by or is for, their age group. I work with, or I feel like this video process works best for like middle school to like high school. So, certainly what a middle schooler creates might not appeal to a junior in high school, that sort of thing. So the audience is their peers, and trying to get them to be on the side of content creators and creating video that has a purpose. We started off with the YouTube and the TikTok and things of that nature, and some of that stuff is prank videos or dance challenges, but the audience is their peers. And I guess, the assessment or knowing if it hit the mark or the judge would be, what did their peers walk away with that from? So I guess that is the tie to journalism. How is it assessed? What are we trying to do with the audience? How do we know if it landed? What did the person who saw this, the viewer, the audience, what did they take away from? How are they better? What did they learn that they maybe did not know? How did this change their perspective after having viewed your piece? So that was what the goal was in journalism. And in a lot of times, that's what I'm trying to get students to create, something for their peers that is meaningful. So I've done this. I've talked with different people before. Creating meaningful media is, I guess, would be the goal. Mm-hmm.
With the work that you are doing and have done, is it almost always then the audience is their peers?
For me, it is.
Yeah.
Certainly, when teachers have the program, I let teachers have reign over their classroom. So it can always be modified.
Sure.
For me, it's just helping teachers that don't have a media background shorten the learning curve. You know, there are some teachers who never got any media training, and they don't have time to do media training. Certainly right now we're in a pandemic. You know, teachers have a lot of different things going on, trying to manage maybe remote learning and hybrid learning or in-person learning. So to try to get students to create videos might not necessarily be something that they can add on their plate. So trying to use my expertise, shorten the learning curve. Once the teacher has it, they might want to take it in a different direction. Yeah, but for me, yes, the audience is normally their peers, because again, I want them to be invested, Drew. Like, that's kind of part of the work that I enjoy, or what I emphasize. You know, if they're creating it for their peers, for people who are kind of in their age group, they know what that group likes. And I believe they're more invested in it when they chose it, and they're making it for their age group. They're not making it, I don't know, for their parents.
Yeah. So I certainly see, and we have conversations. Again, you're not necessarily thinking in project-based learning context, but your work does certainly blend or fit well with project-based learning. So when we think about authenticity, one of the things we try to get away from, and teachers will do they'll create things, whether it's media or multimedia or whatever, and they say, oh, they're going to share this with the rest of the class. And that can work sometimes, and certainly is better than just sort of creating it and only the teacher sees or something like that. But we want to then think about, how's that purpose created to the product, and thinking about, what is the audience going to do with that information, with that media, and the ways in which we see that working within the classroom and for the peers could certainly be like, how can we create videos that will help our peers better understand, you name the topic, right? I mean, that could certainly be in there.
Civic education.
Yeah. I mean, it could be anything. You know, it could be, how can we create videos that will entertain our peers? But and so there, you certainly can get some of that leverage piece. But as we work with teachers, we try to say, all right, so in what ways can they create something? And in this case, it would be media, video, perhaps, is that would be perhaps outside of the classroom walls, and whether it's local government or making a pitch or activist campaign or something like that. There's hundreds of ways that we can see that go. It can work when their audience is their peers, and I don't want to say that never works, but we often see teachers using that sort of glorified research project and sort of sharing, like in a science fair kind of ways, or there's a wax museum that we see sometimes, like people just sort of walking through and viewing it, but there's not really a connection to that purpose to the audience, which then we can say, all right, is it meeting the needs of the audience? Is it serving the purpose, right? So if we say, how can we create videos that will entertain our peers, then we have a purpose, which is to entertain. We can then say, what would be entertaining to our peers? How do we know if it's been entertaining? And then, how do we collect the evidence? Well, they're laughing at it or whatever, right? So that's the evidence that it's been entertaining. Or they say, well, this is boring, or they turn it off or whatever, right? And that gets away from some of the quantitative pieces of, is it 1 minute or is it 3 minutes or is it 2 minutes? Because as you sort of said, like, how do we meet students where they are? Part of the thing, a 3-minute video could be too long, because it's, 3 minutes for some kids is a long time. 3 minutes for me watching a video sometimes is too long, right?
The attention span of kids can be short nowadays.
Yeah. Attention span of me. I'm trying to, I love to play golf, and I'm trying to get better, and I watch videos that are tutorial videos, and I find myself clicking through like where's that status bar so I can move it forward, right? Because first of all, I know what the intro is. I need to get to these other pieces. I know they need to say subscribe and click or whatever. But again, sort of thinking about how we get to use some of that authenticity, which could be their peers, could be outside of the peers, to really engage them in that rich inquiry process. So that's kind of the spin that we try to use in the project-based learning context. What are some of the I guess I don't want to say projects, but I'll just use that as a term. Like, what are some of the videos or the ways in which you have seen students do really great work with in your work with them?
So for me, just in terms of taking it to the next level, there was a young man who early on when I started, his name was Cavell Spearman, and he played sports. He really took a liking to it. And he decided he didn't even want to do sports anymore, and wanted to try to have and has created a media production company. So that's one of the things that really makes me smile, that really, energizes me and really continues to propel me forward. He took a concept and actually started a business and turned it into an actual LLC and, creates videos, is in the works, has written a script for a movie, is doing a lot of things at his school. A lot of schools that I encounter don't have any sort of video program. So I don't know, and I would love to hear, what it's like in schools that you work with. I know you're in Kentucky, but I'm sure you work with schools across the country. Yes, there are schools that have media production cameras and they do videos and things of that nature. But part of the reason I'm so passionate about the work is I encounter so many schools where students don't get any type of video, any type of media training. And in the 21st century world in which we live, we're already discussed, video is so prevalent in our society. I just feel some students are at a disadvantage if they don't get some sort of media training. But your question was some of the success stories. So that's why to see a young man who's able to, part of the work is, okay, project-based learning, how can a student take this and will they actually use it? Is this something that they can apply? So the fact that he started, a business and an LLC, that is so huge. Just to see students go on and create videos after I've worked with them. There can be tech tools and things of that nature that teachers use and students use in the classroom, but when it's all said and done, will a student and go and use that? So to see students creating their own stories after I've worked with them, I just follow them on YouTube or social media. I see videos that they've created and things that they've done. Those are the success stories that makes me proud. Yes, there have been students who've done stories on social injustice, which has really been rewarding to see me do those sort of things, but still the same to see students who do stories on video games and why video games are so popular. Those stories are still rewarding as well. So I can name story after story, but just to see students creating, I just believe the creativity piece. We talked about critical thinking. I think we mentioned creativity a little bit, but to understand and get students thinking that they can create, Drew, for me, I think, and when you look at research, creativity is one of those skills that employers are looking for in the 21st century. Some people get stuck in life because they feel like they have limited options. But if you can get a person to stimulate their creativity, I believe that has long-term benefits in the success that they can have in life. So whatever the story is, every student might not, create a business. And it's not just about students who want to be in media and journalism. I hope that you and your audience understand the transferable skills. Schools teach science, but everybody won't be a scientist. Schools teach music, but everybody won't be a musician. Yes, I'm talking about video creation. Everybody doesn't have to go in media, but the things that they learn through the process, I feel are so important and so necessary for students to thrive in this 21st century.
Yeah, you make a great point about the transferability, and it's an interesting way to put the, we teach science, but not everybody will be a scientist. It is the process, right? And I so often talk about the process by which we think about big problems, small problems, all kinds of problems, and this is, I think, a good way to address that as well. What you mentioned some of the things, sort of hardware and infrastructure. What are some of those needs that schools should or would actually need to do this kind of work and do it well?
So the way I teach it, and really, I guess what my lane is making sure schools that don't have a big budget, that they're able to get their students to start creating. Every school might not be able to hire a teacher and pay them $60,000 or more to get a media program. They might not necessarily be able to buy lights and teleprompters and cameras and things of that nature. But the great thing about where we are right now is, I would say pretty much every student has a device because of what happened during the pandemic and remote learning. Most kids, if they didn't have a device, they got a device from their school, whether they have a Chromebook or iPad or whatever the case may be. So all they need to get started, Drew, is a laptop. If you have a phone, certainly you can shoot video on your phone. That's what makes this so relevant right now. When I was in school, there was no editing process like that you can do in a school. The video cameras were so big and bulky, and most schools didn't have that sort of thing. And if you created a video, Drew, where would you put it? Because there was no video to disseminate it. Like, would you put it on a VHS tape, and still, how would the parents see it? So nowadays, because of where we are in 2021, because most students have access to a Chromebook, and you can edit on there with different programs. You could potentially film on your phone. A lot of students have access to the phone, and because of the internet, you can distribute it. I mean, that's what makes this so relevant in 2021. So all they need is the internet and a laptop, and you could get started creating videos. Certainly you could take it from there. And if you have a bigger budget, you could do higher production things. But really what I'm all about is trying to help students or help teachers enhance the learning process. So now, instead of just writing a paper in English about Neil Armstrong, potentially we could do a video. I know you were a social studies teacher. So in terms of just doing a history project on the creation of a car or whatever it is, or archaeology, now we could do a video project where they might retain more information. There have been studies and research that has been done where students, when they do videos and we learn a lot of things visually, you retain things better. So whatever the subject is, whether it's science and we're doing a video about how we did our science project, or we're presenting things in form of a video, really trying to deepen the learning experience, help them retain it, and you don't need a whole lot of equipment to get that done.
Yeah, the shift, and we have a blog piece about this, or at least part of this, is the shift from content consumers to content creators.
Absolutely.
And then taking the next step, something that I think we can, you touched on this a bit in some of the things you've said, but maybe not as explicitly. So contributors, right? So how can we create content and create things, and some of that certainly and really effective ways in which we can do this are often media, especially in today's world, that contribute to society and add value to our community and help people do things. I mean, as you mentioned, I'm on YouTube here and there because there are some great tutorials. I mentioned the golf. I mean, I needed to, I had a leak under my sink recently. I went and searched for a video that would help me, somebody who showed me how to, this is how you would fix this problem and diagnose this problem. And so giving our students an opportunity to move from content, the consumers, right, to creators and perhaps even contributors, which is one of those authenticity pieces. I'm curious how you think you have, kids. One of them certainly probably consuming more video than the other, 1-year-old, but 1-year-olds are consuming some video in some limited forms. How do you have a 9-year-old daughter, right? I know you have, on your Twitter feed, I saw she created a video, but how do you think about that balance of just personally and for your own children, consumption of video and engagement with video and media?
I have to practice what I preach. So she has to be a creator. She has no other choice in terms of being a creator. I limit the amount of time that she can watch YouTube because I talk with her daily and she probably gets tired of me talking to her about it. You can't just watch other people live their life. So it's the same thing. You can't just be a consumer. You have to be a creator in life. And we could just transition to it. A lot of people just spectate in life. We just watching other people live their life. I mean, that could be a broader discussion of reality TV.
Yeah.
But life should be participation. You should be actively trying to be the best that you can be to make a mark on society, to utilize your gifts and use your potential to the fullest. So yeah, for me, she only has a limited amount of YouTube time per day. And there are some days when no YouTube is allowed because I just can't. I have to develop in my children, and I feel like it's important, for young people of all ages to put them on the other side of creating. I heard somebody say, in life, there are people who are consumers and there are people in life who are creators. And when I think of even a Mark Zuckerberg or a Steve Jobs, certainly we're getting off into products and things of that nature. But the creation process, once you stimulate that, Drew, that can just, cross so many boundaries. When somebody gets out of their comfort zone, that can just have such a profound and huge effect. So you were talking about my daughter, but again, absolutely, being a creator is something that's imperative in my household.
Yeah. Well, it is a really difficult piece. I've talked about it on some podcasts about media and social media, and the social media is different than media, but it's obviously closely related. And I have two daughters who I wish didn't have phones but have phones, and it's really, really hard to monitor some of that time that they spend on technology tools and making that distinction that are they creating something? Are they actually using their brain versus sort of just vegging out? As a kid, I was limited to, and this is literally back when cable was brand new, and we didn't have anywhere near the amount of media that we have in our world now. But I was allowed 1 hour of TV a day. I could bank it if I wanted to watch 2 hours the next night or something like that. But then, we spend all kinds of time playing Atari, which my kids now, it's funny, they get the joystick out and like, this, I can't work this. Which, see, I don't know how you can't work a stick and a button, but, I don't know if you've tried to play, maybe you, at your age, maybe you're able to do the PlayStation. That feels like Chisholm Bop to me. I can't do that, right? But, so I'm curious, it brings me to a question around your education and what your experience as a student was in K-12. I know you talked about your parents and your family and some of those pieces, but as a student in schools, I don't know if it was public schools or what it was, but what was that like for you?
It was a good experience. Expectations were high because my parents were educators. So it would have been a poor reflection on them for them to be teachers and their children didn't excel in school. So for me, learning was year round. Even in the summertime, I didn't go to summer school. I had summer school at home. I had to do book reports during the summer. I would have to do flashcards and things of that nature. And I hated it. But as I got older, some of the things that you don't understand why your parents do, it made a lot of sense and it helped out. I do the same thing with my daughter. We do flashcards. I mean, you mentioned it before. During spring break, I don't know what everybody does on spring break, but my daughter was creating a video report. We took out a green screen. She read a book. Instead of writing out a book report, she had to do a video report. So, my educational experience, I did well in school because school never stopped, and I had parents who pushed education and the importance of it. I guess one of the things that I really want to see education do is, though, evolve with the times. So journaling was something that was big, writing a story, paper and pen. But now that technology has evolved to the place where it is, are teachers utilizing technology and helping their students create things? So there are so many apps and tools and things out there where teachers create videos to help students learn. And that's great. But again, are students actually creating and participating in the learning process, where it's just not the teacher teaching, well, it's the student actually participating in the learning process in a different fashion. Like, I believe your work is in this direction and I'm so passionate about it. The world has evolved, technology has evolved, but the way in which we teach students some of these basic skills, critical thinking, reading, speaking, writing, the way we teach those things, have those shifted with the times. And I'm trying to help teachers, that are willing to, but don't necessarily have media training, maybe shift and innovate and move in a different direction. We've seen from the pandemic in terms of, what type of learning can be done online and how we don't have to have worksheets and textbooks. So how do we continue that momentum in terms of innovations in education to achieve the same goals, but just maybe modernizing some of the methods in which we use?
So was there ever a point that you genuinely reflected, because there was for me, where I was, I think, a senior in high school, and I said, I don't want to go to college. I'm done with school. Like, school to me was lots of busy work and not particularly cognitively engaging in many ways. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why I ended up becoming an educator, because I felt like there's got to be a better way to do this, and I certainly still believe that. But I remember getting to a point when I think I can even envision, maybe I'm making this up, sort of revisionist history, but I remember telling my parents, and especially my mom, saying, I think I'm just not going to go to college. I think I'm done with school. I'm sort of checked out. They said they advised me otherwise, right? That was not really an option, and good for them, right? But did you ever sort of come to a crossroads like that?
Well, the same way your parents advised you, like when your parents are educators, like college is just the next step. It's just like a natural next step. So right. I always knew that was the expectation. And in my head, whether it came from them or just my thought process of society at that time, I felt like if you didn't go to college, how will you be successful? Now and where I am now as an adult and the way life has changed, is it still the same? Not as much. I'm still a huge proponent of college. But again, I mentioned, in 97, more than 2 decades ago, I felt like at that time as a teenager, you had to have it. Like if you wanted to be successful and achieve good things, have a career, whatever the case may be, like college was necessary to do that. But to your point, you mentioned you felt like I checked out and you didn't want to go to college at that time. I never had any thoughts, any ever inklings of going past the 4-year degree. Like once I did the bachelor's, that was always the end for me. Certainly, again, my parents, being educators, wanted me to do the master's and continue on with another degree after that. But, I had already chosen my field. And in media or broadcasting, you didn't need a master's degree. A bachelor's degree was all that was necessary because they want to see how good you are in front of the camera, how well you speak. Schooling isn't a huge part of excelling in media.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm a school or an administrator or teacher perhaps, and am interested in your work and engaging with you in this work, what are the ways that they can do that or should do that, and what are the ways that how does it look? Because there's more than just one thing, right?
Well, basically, it is our online course. You mentioned it before, I believe, www.videojournalismpro.com. So that is our signature online program where it helps teachers implement or integrate media right into their classroom. Schools don't have to have a standalone media arts program. They can now learn the media creation process and use that process to help their students create videos that inform, inspire, and impact. And they can do this, in an English unit. It could potentially be done in a social studies unit. It could potentially be done in a science unit. Certainly the teacher, would have to kind of, use it for their subject and things of that nature. But once you know the process, so many people talk about ed tech, but if you know how to tell a story and you know how to integrate video, that's something that's timeless. Like, we've told stories, for hundreds of years, but it's now just using the technology to actually present visuals or add pictures and video to that story. So that is our signature online program, Drew, really just trying to save teachers time. Some people ask me, well, can't teachers learn how to do this on YouTube? Well, I did this for close to 20 years. So what I learned in college in over 20 years, you can't necessarily get that on YouTube. And for a teacher, to go to YouTube and find it and then learn it and create lessons, it's all there for teachers. It's a resource that's already in hand where they can just simply pretty much plug and play. Like, it's a pandemic. Teachers only have a limited amount of time. So I'm really trying to save them time and really, really shorten their learning curve to help students get this important information and teach them how to create videos and have a deeper learning experience.
So on the website, you put in your email and then they get a copy for free, right? Are there ways in which they can extend that and go beyond, either with you, or like, what does it look like in that process?
Absolutely. So on the website, I actually have, which I believe you may have taken a look at, it's a free guide, 10 ways for students to create better video content and create a better life. So that just, you go to the website, I'm offering that for free, just to give some strategies to teachers that they can implement and use right now, in terms of maybe just, for instance, how would you turn your laptop into a teleprompter? Some students might not be comfortable presenting on camera. They might not be able to memorize things, but you can actually turn your laptop into a teleprompter, again, to help students present on video and develop these communication skills. Some adults still have public speaking fears. That can be something that adults deal with. So really trying to help students develop those skills at a young age. Once you once you put in your email and then get the free guide, in the free guide, at the end of it, it has a way that you can find more information about the course. So, you download the free guide. In the free guide, it says, if you would like more info, or if you would like to take the next step, it has that opportunity there. And also they get a few emails as well that outlines the course. It's a platform that I have. It's modules. And certainly if they want more information, they can contact me about, okay, certainly some of the things you talk about, how do you find a story? Are we doing a story about our community? Are we doing a story about our family? Are we doing a story about our school? What's some of the research that we would do? What's some of the questions that we want to ask? Do we want to do an interview? How will we interview somebody properly? Just, going through the journalism process all the way down from story development to story creation to story distribution, going through that whole process, but now putting it in an educational context, putting it in an actual classroom unit and helping teachers do that sort of thing.
And they can, as a follow-up, because one of the things that you talk about, services are mentioned. Do you work directly with schools and with classes and teachers?
Absolutely. So, prior to the pandemic, I was solely in schools, running the program, and I would have a lot of interest from schools, but as one person, I could only work with so many schools at a time. So during the pandemic, that gave me a time to kind of reevaluate, how could I try to serve more teachers and help more schools with this process? So that's where the course came in terms of something that's on demand. These are lessons that are pre-recorded in a regular setting. With me being a vendor, I don't know how it works in Kentucky and different places, but a vendor, I would come in and teach my program. But just like a teacher or a vendor, once you give them the material, they have to take notes and things of that nature. But if you have something that's on demand online, it's something a student can watch over and over and over again to help them better retain the information. Or if a student was absent, they were sick and they didn't get it, they didn't miss anything. And that way a student can watch it again. And it just has so many other benefits. But in terms of me actually working with schools, certainly I can work with schools across the country and facilitate the program as well, over a Google Meet or a Zoom. Certainly those services are available as well, for sure.
Yeah, and we're starting to see some of that open up. We work with schools around the country, around the world, actually, and hopefully soon. I was supposed to be in Germany in August of last year, and somehow that turned to video, and hopefully we'll be able to resume some of that. But it will be interesting, especially in the context of this conversation, how much the sort of landscape of professional learning and this sort of use of video, and whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, and Zoom and these kinds of things will change over the sort of course of events going forward. So, Clement, it's been great talking with you. I know, again, we have the website, which is videojournalismpro.com. You also have a Twitter, which is Clement TV _. We'll put this in the show notes. Any other resources or places they should find you, or things that you think they should see?
No, just certainly, Facebook is C Townsend TV. First initial, last name, Townsend TV. I'm pretty active on Facebook, and LinkedIn as well, Clement Townsend. Those are a couple of places you can find me. I always love to interact with teachers. I always love to chat with teachers. Definitely would love them to go to that www.videojournalismpro.com and just get the free resource and just see, what I have to offer. And again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, just trying to get teachers to meet students where they are. Understand that media is not just entertainment. Sometimes it can get pigeonholed in terms of some of the students are just watching on the phone, but media can also be educational when presented in the right context, and so many benefits, not just being a media professional like myself, but these transferable skills. For somebody that might want to own a hair salon, it helps to be able to create videos, Drew, to possibly showcase some of the things that you can do. If you want to have a restaurant, it helps to be able to create videos to talk about your food choices and maybe how healthy it is. If you want to be in a real estate field, if you're an agent and want to show off homes, or you flip homes, you want to rehab homes, pretty much every career field, whether it's fashion, finance, politics, sports, real estate, there's some type of video element to that. So getting to learn these transferable skills and skills that they will actually need to succeed and thrive in the 21st century, I think that's so important and could be used and be beneficial in every single classroom.
Okay. Well, last question before we sign off. Who's your favorite all-time broadcaster?
Favorite all-time broadcaster? Wow, you put me on the spot with that one. It's hard to say one. Certainly, it's a gentleman, James Brown, who does the NFL work and has done that for a long time. I believe CBS is who he works for. And then it would have to be Stuart Scott, the ESPN anchor, who was pretty polarizing, but he really made the field popular, and people such as myself could be comfortable being who I was. So I would say Stuart Scott and James Brown. Hard to say just one.
Stuart Scott was great. I don't remember him being all that polarizing, but was his style?
Yeah, his style put some people off.
Really?
Because, some of the cliches or some of the sayings, a lot of people felt like, they could do without that sort of thing.
Cooler than the other side of the pillow, or
absolutely. Booyah, that sort of thing. Everybody wasn't always on board with that sort of thing. I thought it was cool. Certainly it seemed like you had no issue with it, but there were a lot of people who didn't like his style and his flair and felt like he was trying too hard and things of that nature. But, anytime you're trying to do something different, there will always be detractors. That's how it goes.
Well, ESPN back in those days was certainly entertaining, and I miss those days. It doesn't seem like the same to me anymore, but it's a whole other podcast. Clement, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
That'll do it for today's podcast episode. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to review us and share us on your network so we can grow our audience to better meet your needs. Also, don't forget to find us on our websites, TeachThought.com and WeGrowTeachers.com, as well as our various social media outlets.